Welcome to Dune, chapter by chapter. I'm Dominic. So, in the last chapter that I talked about, we had Paul and Jessica were, getting to know the Fremen, kind of settling in with the rest of the Fremen troop with Stilgar. And then Paul had this, he consumed a lot of spice and almost had like a break with his prescience. He got overloaded with prescience. He was able to see like all these infinite possibilities of future outcomes in that chapter. And that chapter ended with him seeing a vision of himself, a future possibility of himself lying underground with a knife wound. So now in this chapter, we have the battle between Jamis and Paul. So this is Paul's first one-on-one major battle in the book. He went up against the Harkonnen in the crashed ornithopter and stuff and killed that guy with a precision kick and stuff like that. But this is going to be the first real battle that he's going to have to fight one-on-one. And this is going to be like a much more intimate battle than he had in the previous book. So now Jamis is a guy who's kind of got this, he's been brooding ever since because Paul overpowered him at the first meeting they had and actually got his weapon from him. And so Jamis has been really not happy about this ever since. And he's almost a bit of a power seeker, kind of a troublemaker. He's called out Stilgar before in the past. And so he's not happy with Paul and Jessica, and he doesn't believe the prophecy. He thinks they're a couple of frauds. And he wants to prove that they are a couple of frauds by killing Paul in combat. Now, what's interesting about this is Paul and Jessica, they don't know the full consequences of combat. They think it's just going to be like a sparring match or something. They don't realize how serious it is. That when one of these challenges are thrown, it's to the death. So Paul is going to go up against him, but now Jessica comes out and in defense of Paul. She wants to take on Jamis. And she says, if you got any problems, basically you can deal with me. And then Jamis doesn't want to fight her. He wants to fight Paul. And Stilgar tells her, well, you really can't fight for your son. The challenge is made towards him. He has to do it. And then even Stilgar is kind of fears for Paul because Paul is only young. That he tries goading Jamis. He basically runs off at the mouth of Jamis, hopefully trying to provoke him enough that he'll get mad enough. He will challenge Stilgar instead of Paul. But Jamis is wise to Stilgar's act and says, no, you're not going to goad me into combat. I know what you're trying to do. I want to take on Paul. So then Jessica tries using the voice on him, which starts to work, but then Jamis realizes and calls it, she's using sorcery on me. She's using the voice, so Stilgar makes her be silent. He said, you can't do that. You can't use the voice. This is something your son has to do on his own, and you can't interfere at all. So Jamis has this boiling up rage, and he wants to take out Paul. He wants to prove himself, because he says that was just a fluke that he was able to take me the first time. But before they can shut Jessica up, she implants fear in Jamis's mind by using the voice. And so that's basically what this whole chapter is about, is this battle and the build up to it. So they're all getting ready, and Jamis strips off his still suit, so does Paul. Chani gives Paul a few pointers, saying that he always switches knife hands. That's one of his classic moves, Jamis. So watch out for that. And so they begin their battle and it's kind of interesting, the setting. They're kind of in a circle of Fremen watching them, and the glow globes are kind of switched over to a different light frequency, so it's kind of like a yellow cast on everything, which I thought was kind of cool. And so they end up having their battle, and there's a lot of feints going back and forth, and it's a pretty interesting fight. Frank Herbert does a pretty good job actually describing the knife fights in Dune. I thought it's pretty accurate, or not accurate, but pretty adequate is what I meant to say. Now, what's interesting about this is we get to see the disadvantage of being trained in knife fighting using a body shield, because with all the other battles, all these nobles always have the personal body shields to protect themselves. And so they're trained to fight with personal body shields. And as you know, the way the shields are set up, you can penetrate a shield by moving slowly through it, but it will deflect any fast movements. So you got to be fast on defense and slow on attack. And where Jameis, there's no body shields on Arrakis, so he's trained like, I guess, more traditionally. So it's like he's not going to be slow on attack. It's going to be fast on attack, fast on. It's a totally different style from what Paul's doing. So it takes Paul some getting used to. He's not used to this kind of fighting. He's used to fighting with a body shield. He doesn't have a body shield in this. So this is where Jameis has an advantage over Paul, which I thought was pretty interesting in the battle. So they go back and forth and stuff like that. And there's kind of hints that Fremen knives break and stuff like that, because he says, may my blade chip. And then that's the other disadvantage. Paul's using a strange weapon. It's not his regular knife that he would use if he was fighting in House Atreides. And his first time using a Chris knife in battle as well. What's interesting is, I think in this chapter, Jameis really underestimates Paul. And he probably honestly believes that Paul just got in a lucky shot at him during their first encounter. And because Paul, you got to remember, is small for his age, and he is just a 15-year-old boy at this point. And Jameis is a grown man wanting to kill him. And so it seems almost a little bit odd or cowardly on Jameis's part that you would call out someone this young if you were a grown man and try to kill them off. I don't know how that would repair your pride in any way, shape, or form after you just got your ass handed to you the first time by a 15-year-old boy. But that's what Jameis does. I think he just underestimates Paul, not realizing that Paul is, been trained since birth to fight by some of the greatest fighters in the Imperium. Gurney Halleck, the Sword Master, Duncan Idaho, and even trained in the Bene Gesserit, Bindu Prana ways, the Weirding way, and all that. So Paul is like a really well-oiled fighting machine, and I don't think Jameis realizes that until they actually start fighting, and Paul starts outmaneuvering him and drawing blood from him and all that. And then you can see the fear start to form on Jameis's face that, okay, he may have gotten bit off way more than he can chew, because it talks about it in the chapter that he realizes that this isn't just some 15-year-old boy he's going to mop the floor with. This is a fighting machine, a killing machine that's been trained to fight and kill from birth almost. Like Paul's whole life has been trained by some of the best. And so they're going around, and then Paul actually gets him down, draws some blood, and then asks him to yield, because Paul thinks, well, it's like fighting everywhere else. Well, if, I'll ask him to yield. If he yields, then the fight's over. But Stilgar tells him, no, don't work like that. When you get called out, it's to the death. It's someone's got to die here in this duel. So Paul's fighting around, and then people are kind of confused because Paul's not just going for the kill. Paul's like toying with them. That's how they perceive it. They're like, just don't toy with the guy. They kind of see it as being sadistic and cruel that Paul's toying with this guy instead of just getting it over with and killing the guy. But really what it is Paul doesn't want to kill this guy. Paul's never killed anyone before, except for the Harkonnen guard, and that probably was not totally intentional, more of a reactionary thing when he kicked the guy and killed him. Where this has got to be more intentional, and he's never really done anything like this before. So Jessica's wondering, well, does he even have the strength to do it? Can he even kill this guy? And so they're going around battling, and then Paul realizes he has to do it, and then Jameis makes a mistake. He gets desperate, and then he thinks back on his training with Duncan and those guys, and Duncan's always telling him, like, when your opponent gets really desperate, they become really dangerous. But at the same time, that's when they're going to make a mistake. And Jameis does that. He leaps through the air and he switches his knife hands, but then it's kind of a clumsy jump, so he loses his balance, and then Paul's able to dodge the knife and get the guy, and so stab Jameis as he's coming downwards towards Paul, and then describes Jameis basically hitting the floor, rolling over, staring at Paul in shock, and dies. And so immediately, because the Fremen don't waste no water, and that's a full body of water there, they just immediately take his body out of there. And then after the fight, what I think is interesting is Jessica doesn't want Paul, because this was a kind of an easy match. This was not quite a slam dunk for Paul, but this was some low-hanging fruit, this guy, Jameis, that Paul killed off. So it was an easy kill, and Jessica can kind of see some of the Fremen were kind of like getting into this fight, like, almost getting excited by the battle. So Jessica doesn't want this to become a thing where Paul takes pleasure and gets addicted to the high of killing someone in this way, so it almost becomes like a sport, and then soaking up the glories of it afterwards. So she almost plants it in him. So how does it feel to be a murderer and a killer? And a very condescending tone. And then Paul's almost, it hits him like a slap in the face. And she wants him to not become desensitized to the idea of taking life or murdering someone. So she wants Paul to feel guilty. And Paul does. Paul didn't want to kill this guy. And the other interesting thing is this was kind of like another blind spot with his prescience. He didn't know how this was going to go because he had the vision of himself actually dead on the floor. So there was a possible future where Jameis actually did kill Paul. And now the other interesting thing that happens in this chapter is this is the chapter where he gets his name, his Fremen name. So they have like I guess like the secret name or his troop name that the tribe gives him. So they picked that one for him, and it's Usul, because Stilgar says, you're the strength beneath the base of the pillar, like the strength that you can't really tell that you're strong, but you got some strength there. And so we're going to call you Usul. That's going to be your name amongst the troop. And so then you get to pick your other name. And so Paul asks, well, what do you guys call those little mice that's always hopping around and stuff like that? So they tell him, well, we call that one Muad'Dib. So Paul says, well, can I be known as Muad'Dib? And Stilgar says, sure enough, that can be your name. But then Paul says, well, I don't want to give up fully my Atreides name. So can I be known as Paul-Muad'Dib? And so they all say, yeah, you can be known. From now on, you are Paul-Muad'Dib. So that is actually something different. Because, and Jessica is taken back by it, because Paul told her in the future he was going to be called this. They were going to call him Muad'Dib. This is one of his prescient moments. But in that original vision, he was just called Muad'Dib. And so Paul changed the future slightly by adding Paul in there. Paul hyphenated with Muad'Dib. So he realizes, well, because he's trying to avoid this dark future, this possibility of the jihad that he keeps seeing in his future of like a holy war where millions are getting massacred all in his name. He doesn't want that to happen. So he's trying to avoid that. He's trying to change the future. And so he sees that, well, it's possible I can change the future, because he saw the one possibility where he was dead on the floor. He changed that. And then he saw the future. He changed it again slightly because he was originally called just Muad'Dib, and now he changed it to Paul-Muad'Dib. So he's trying to avoid that dark future, that possibility of a future he sees in front of him. But even after all this, he still gets flashes of these fanatic crusaders, marching across the galaxy and, massacring all these people under the banner of House Atreides, and doing it in Muad'Dib's name. And so he's trying to avoid that future, and we'll see if he's actually successful in doing it. So I actually really liked this chapter. I thought it was pretty good. I liked the action in it was well done, and I like that this ability Paul has to see into the future is portrayed as a double-edged sword, and can actually be a disadvantage sometimes to his detriment. And then just the different style of knife fighting and how he had to adjust because he was so used to fighting with a shield, and now he doesn't have a shield. He has to knife fight without a shield, but he still beat the guy anyway. So, it shows that Paul can adapt to different situations and kind of think on his feet there because of all the extensive training he's had over the years. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and I will see you at the next one.